The heavy bass of a Christmas party vibrated through the floorboards above my head, mocking the silence of the freezing basement where I stood. My son was not upstairs celebrating. He was down here, emaciated and shivering, shackled to a steel beam with an industrial chain, while his wife's family toasted to their good fortune directly above us. They thought they had broken him, but they had just awakened the ruthless woman I buried 20 years ago. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I am 58 years old, and for 3 decades, I was the woman CEOs called when they needed to butcher a company without getting blood on their Italian suits. I left that life behind in New York to grow old in the silence of Oregon, burying my ruthless streak alongside my husband. But you can never truly bury a nature like mine. You only put it to sleep. The call that woke it up came at 2 a.m. on December 24th. It was Mrs. Gable, the elderly neighbor who lived next door to my son, Liam, in Minnesota. Her voice was thin and trembling over the static. "Eleanor." "I know it is late," she stammered, but I heard him. I heard Liam screaming. It wasn't a happy scream. It sounded like he was being hurt. And then, nothing. Just loud music. I did not ask for details. I did not call the police, knowing how influential my son's in-laws were in that county. I got into my car and drove. The blizzard was burying the Midwest in white, but I cut through the ice and wind with a singular, cold focus. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, not from fear, but from a rage I had not felt since the day my husband died. I had let Liam drift away after his father passed. I had been too consumed by my own grief to fight for him, and I let him fall into the arms of a family that treated people like assets on a balance sheet. By the time I pulled up to the driveway of the Victorian house Liam had inherited, the world was a void of swirling snow. The house looked abandoned from the outside. The windows were dark, and the front yard was untouched, pristine white. Yet, as I killed the engine, I felt it. A low, rhythmic thumping. It was the bass of electronic music, muffled and deep, coming from inside. I sat there for a moment, staring at the dark structure. I thought about the Scotts, Vivian Scott. Liam's mother-in-law was a woman who smiled with her teeth, but never her eyes. She and her clan were local royalty, wealthy and obsessed with control. They had wrapped their tentacles around my gentle, soft-spoken son, isolating him until I was just a voice on the phone twice a year. I stepped out of the car. The wind bit at my face, but I ignored it. I did not go to the front door. I walked around the side of the house, trudging through knee-deep snow to the back entrance. It was locked. I peered through the glass pane. The kitchen was pitch black. I took a heavy stone from the garden border, wrapped it in my scarf, and smashed the pane near the lock. The sound was swallowed by the howling wind. I reached in, turned the deadbolt, and slipped inside. The air in the kitchen was freezing, colder than a house should be on Christmas Eve. It smelled stale. I moved silently, my boots making no sound on the hardwood. I swept the beam of my small penlight across the room. The furniture was all wrong. The heavy oak table was shoved violently against the wall, scraping the paint. One chair lay overturned near the pantry. It did not look like a home waiting for Christmas morning. It looked like a crime scene that had been hastily ignored. The silence on the ground floor was unnatural. It was thick and suffocating, contrasting with the faint, rhythmic bass vibration coming from the floors above. I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. It was the sensation of being stalked, a feeling I had not experienced since my days swimming with sharks in Manhattan. I stood perfectly still, listening to the house breathe. Then I heard it. It came from the floorboards directly beneath my feet. Clink. It was faint, barely a whisper of sound, but distinct. Metal striking metal. It was not the furnace. It was not the plumbing. It was the heavy, dull sound of a chain dragging against concrete. I stared at the door leading to the basement. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from exertion, but from dread. I knew in that moment that the peace I had cultivated for 20 years was gone. I was about to open a door to hell, and I was going to have to walk right into it. I gripped the cold porcelain knob of the basement door and twisted. It opened with a groan that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The air that rushed up to meet me was vile. It did not smell like a storage room. It smelled of damp earth, aggressive bleach, and the unmistakable copper tang of dried blood. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and descended the wooden stairs. They creaked under my boots. At the bottom, darkness swallowed everything. I clicked my penlight back on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the freezing air. I moved the light across the concrete floor, past stacks of old boxes, until it landed on the far wall. I stopped breathing. My son, Liam, was slumped against a vertical steel support beam. He was 32 years old, but in that harsh white light, he looked like a broken child. A heavy industrial chain was wrapped around his waist and secured to the beam. His wrists were zip-tied loosely in front of him, raw and bloody where he had clearly struggled. His face was a map of bruises, purple and yellow flowering across his jawline. I rushed forward, dropping to my knees beside him. "Liam," I whispered, my voice shaking. His head snapped up. His eyes were wide, filled with a primal terror that no mother should ever see in her child. He shrank back against the steel, flinching as if I were about to strike him. "No. No. Please." I didn't make a sound. He rasped, his voice cracking from dehydration. "It is me," I said, reaching out to touch his face. "It is Mom." Recognition slowly dawned in his eyes, replaced immediately by absolute panic. He lunged forward as far as the chain would allow, grabbing my coat with trembling hands. "Mom. Oh God, you have to go. You have to leave right now," he hissed, his eyes darting to the ceiling. I ignored him and ran my hands over his shoulders. He was skeletal. Through his thin, dirty t-shirt, I could feel every rib. He had been starving. My successful, handsome architect's son had been reduced to a bag of bones in his own cellar. Above us, the floorboards vibrated again. The electronic thumping was louder down here, carrying through the structure of the house. It was a party. People were dancing directly above his head while he rotted in the dark. "Who did this?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. "Who put you in chains? Liam?" He did not answer. He just stared at the ceiling, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "Please, don't let them know you are here," he begged, clutching my sleeve. "If they find you, I don't know what she will do." "She—" I asked. I moved to the chain, examining the lock. It was a high-security padlock, the kind used for shipping containers. I pulled a hairpin from my bun, a reflex from a lifetime of solving small problems. But one look told me this was futile. I needed bolt cutters or a key. I yanked on the chain in frustration, the metal clanking loudly. "Stop." Liam gasped, freezing in terror. He held his breath, waiting to see if the music upstairs would stop. It didn't. The bass kept thumping, indifferent to our suffering. I sat back on my heels, looking at him. "We are going to get you out of here," I said firmly. "But you have to tell me who is upstairs." Liam looked at me, his eyes hollow. The spark I remembered from his youth was gone, extinguished by something systemic and cruel. "Mum, you don't understand," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They aren't like normal people. They don't see me as a husband or a son. They look at me like property, like an asset they are trying to liquidate." The word asset struck a nerve deep inside me. It was a language I understood. This was not a crime of passion. This was a transaction. I stood up, dusting the dirt from my knees. I looked at the heavy lock, then up at the ceiling where the laughter and music were filtering down. I could not break him out yet, not without tools, and if I tried and failed, they would kill us both. I needed to know the enemy. I needed to see exactly who was drinking champagne while my son bled. "I will be right back," I said, my voice turning into ice. "No, don't go up there." Liam sobbed quietly. I turned away from his pleading eyes, hardening my heart for what I had to do. "I need the key, Liam, and I'm going to get it." I walked back toward the stairs. I was no longer just a mother. I was the shark that had survived Wall Street, and I was swimming up to the surface to feed. I eased the basement door shut behind me, leaving the smell of bleach and fear in the dark. The transition was jarring. One moment I was in a cold dungeon, and the next I was standing in the shadows of a hallway that smelled of pine needles and expensive perfume. The thumping bass I had heard outside was softer here, drowned out by the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of polite conversation. I moved toward the living room, keeping my body pressed against the wainscoting. Through the crack in the heavy oak doors, I saw them, the Scott family. There were about a dozen of them, dressed in cashmere and silk, holding glasses of champagne as if they were attending a gala rather than squatting in my son's home while he bled beneath their feet. In the center of the room stood Vivian Scott. She was a small woman with hair dyed a severe shade of blonde and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched. She held court by the fireplace, one hand resting casually on the mantle my late husband had carved himself. I had met Vivian only 3 times. The first time, she had looked at me with open disdain, sensing immediately that I was not a woman who could be charmed or bullied. She had called me abrasive to Liam. I had called her a shark in a cardigan to myself. Honestly. "It took longer than I expected," Vivian was saying, her voice carrying clearly over the jazz music that had replaced the bass. "He has a stubborn streak. I blame his mother. That woman has a skull made of granite." A ripple of laughter went through the room. I felt my pulse steady into a cold, hard rhythm. "But the isolation therapy works wonders if you are patient," a man in a navy suit added, swirling his drink. Did he finally sign? Vivian smiled, a tight expression that did not reach her eyes. He signed, "The transfer of the deed and the power of attorney are done." It was messy. But once we explained that his compliance was the only way to make the pain stop, he became quite cooperative. She raised her glass. To the end of the training phase. To the training phase they chorused. My stomach turned. This was not just abuse. This was a hostile takeover. I closed my eyes for a second, and a memory flashed behind my eyelids. It was 2 years ago. Liam had called me, sounding tired. They just want to help manage the finances. Mum, he had said, Vivian knows a lot about local real estate. She says I am sitting on a gold mine if I just let them restructure the assets. I had told him to be careful. I had told him that people who offer to manage your money usually plan to keep it. But he had been so in love with Amanda. Then another memory hit me. Amanda, Liam's wife, sitting in my kitchen in Oregon last Thanksgiving, crying while Liam was in the bathroom. My parents, they don't lose. Eleanor. She had sobbed, her hands shaking around a mug of tea. They look at Liam's inheritance and they just see a resource pool. They will tear him apart to get it. I had dismissed it as family drama. I had told her to stand up to them. I was a fool. I opened my eyes, snapping back to the present. The Scotts were not just greedy in-laws. They were criminals operating with the precision of a corporate raiding party. What about the wife? The man in the navy suit asked. Is Amanda on board? Vivian waved her hand dismissively. Amanda is weak. She will do what she is told. The real issue is what to do with the boy now that we have the signature. We cannot keep him in the basement forever. People talk. The room went quiet. I held my breath. Dr. Henderson has arranged a bed at the Willow Creek facility, Vivian said, taking a sip of her champagne. We move him tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. We will file the paperwork claiming an acute psychotic break. With his injuries, it will look like he did it to himself during a manic episode. Once he is in the system, under a conservatorship, he will be medicated until he doesn't know his own name. She paused, looking around the room with satisfaction. By New Year's Day, Liam Walsh will be a tragic memory, and this property will finally be properly managed. The air in the hallway felt suddenly thin. They were going to institutionalize him. If they moved him to a psychiatric facility with a signed power of attorney, I would never get him out. He would disappear into a haze of sedatives and legal red tape, and they would strip his life down to the bone. I stepped back from the door, my boots making no sound on the runner rug. I had heard enough. I did not need to hear more about their victory. I needed to ruin it. I had less than 5 hours before 7 o'clock. I turned and headed back toward the kitchen. I needed to verify exactly what they had made him sign. And then I was going to burn their little celebration to the ground. I slipped away from the living room, moving like a ghost through the hallway until I found the heavy mahogany door of the study. It was unlocked. Arrogance does that to people. They assume no one would dare challenge them, so they leave their weapons out in the open. The room smelled of cigar smoke and expensive leather. I closed the door softly behind me and locked it. I did not have much time. I moved straight to the massive oak desk in the center of the room. It was cluttered with papers, wine glasses, and a sleek tablet. I turned on the desk lamp, keeping the light low. My eyes scanned the piles of documents until I found a thick leather binder labeled The Walsh Project. My stomach tightened. They did not even use his name. To them, my son was just a project to be managed and dismantled. I flipped the binder open. The first document was a durable power of attorney. It granted Vivian Scott full control over Liam's medical and financial decisions. I looked at the bottom of the page. Liam's signature was there, but it was a jagged, trailing scrawl, utterly unlike his usual precise handwriting. He was drugged. I whispered to the empty room. They drugged him to get the ink on the paper. I turned the page. It was a transfer of deed for the house, this house, which my husband had built with his own hands. It had been transferred to a holding company called Scott and Associates for the sum of $1. Next came the bank accounts, his savings, his retirement fund, the trust I had set up for him. Everything had been drained and moved into offshore accounts managed by Vivian. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep reading. Under the financial documents was a brochure for a place called Willow Creek Behavioral Health. I knew this place. It was a private facility in North Dakota that had been investigated twice for patient abuse and unlawful imprisonment. It was a dumping ground where wealthy families hid their problems. Stapled to the brochure was an admission form. The intake date was marked for December 25th at 7 in the morning. That was in less than 5 hours. The reason for admission was listed as acute schizophrenic episode with violent tendencies. They were not just stealing his money, they were erasing his credibility. Once he was in that facility, anything he said about the theft would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. I looked up at the tablet on the desk and tapped the screen. It woke up instantly, displaying a grid of 4 camera feeds. My breath hitched. They had cameras everywhere. 1 was in the kitchen, 1 was in the living room, and 2 were in the basement. I watched the screen, horrified. The camera in the basement was high definition. I could see Liam clearly, slumped against the beam where I had left him. He was shaking violently now. I tapped on a folder icon labeled Progress Logs. It was full of audio files and photos. I clicked on an audio file dated 3 days ago. Vivian's voice cut through the silence of the study, crisp and professional. The subject is still resistant to the transfer. Her voice said from the speaker, "We are increasing the isolation protocol. I told the staff that if they can stabilize him and get the signature by Christmas, there is a $10,000 bonus for everyone involved. He is just an asset. After all, broken assets need to be stripped for parts." I stopped the recording. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so white-hot that I thought I might burn the house down right then and there. I opened the photo folder next. It was a gallery of torture. There were pictures of Liam being sprayed with cold water, pictures of him being deprived of sleep, bright lights shining in his face. And then, a photo of his bruised, bloody face from yesterday, with a caption typed underneath significant progress. "Resistance is breaking." I gripped the edge of the desk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take the heavy brass lamp and smash every piece of furniture in this room until it was nothing but splinters. I wanted to go downstairs and wrap that chain around Vivian's neck. But I stopped myself. Violence would only get me arrested, and Liam would be lost forever. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the woman who had dismantled hostile takeovers for breakfast. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I took high-resolution photos of every document, every signature, and every page of the medical admission forms. I recorded the audio clips from the tablet onto my phone. I took pictures of the surveillance feed showing Liam chained up. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the paper trail of a multi-million-dollar fraud ring masquerading as a family. "You want a war." "Vivian," I whispered, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "I am going to give you a war." I arranged the papers back exactly as I had found them. I wiped the surface of the desk with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. I was not just going to rescue my son. I was going to make sure that by the time the sun came up, the Scott family would wish they had never been born. I retreated to the far corner of the study, shielding the glow of my phone screen with my body. I had to act now. If I waited until morning, Liam would be in a van headed for North Dakota, and I would be fighting a losing battle against a legal system that favored the wealthy. I needed to burn their kingdom down while they were still inside toasting their victory. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I had not dialed in 6 years. It belonged to Julian, a man who ran a distressed asset firm in Chicago. He was a shark, just like I used to be. But he owed me his career. I had saved him from a federal indictment in 2008, and he had promised me anything I ever asked for. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Who is this?" he grumbled. "It is Eleanor Walsh," I said, my voice steady. "Wake up, Julian. I am calling in the marker." There was a pause, followed by the rustling of sheets. "Eleanor. My God. I haven't heard that name in ages. Is everything all right?" "No," I cut him off. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it right now. I want you to buy the debt on the Scott family estate in Minnesota. Everything. Their mortgages, their business loans, their lines of credit. I know for a fact they are over-leveraged." The Scotts, Vivian Scott. Julian sounded hesitant. "Eleanor, that is a lot of paper to move at 3 a.m. on Christmas. We are talking about maybe $20 million in liabilities. It will take time. You have 10 minutes. I hissed into the phone. "I don't care what it costs. Buy the debt. Julian? And then I want you to call in the loans immediately, trigger the default clauses, freeze their liquid assets. I want every credit card they swipe to be declined within the hour." Jesus. "Eleanor. What did they do to you?" "They took something of mine," I said, cold as ice. "Do it." Julian. "Or I release the files I have on your offshore accounts in the Caymans." Okay. Consider it done." He stammered. "Give me 15 minutes to wake up my compliance officer." I hung up. Step 1 was complete. Vivian Scott cared about 2 things: power and money. I had just cut off the money. Now for the power. I opened my email app and attached the photos of the fraudulent documents, the audio recordings of the abuse, and the pictures of Liam chained in the basement. I drafted a message to the State Attorney General, the FBI field office in Minneapolis, and the Adult Protective Services emergency line. Subject: urgent, imminent danger, human trafficking and financial fraud at Scott residence. I pressed send. The digital bomb was in the air. Now I needed a distraction. I needed chaos to cover my escape with Liam. I slipped out of the study and found the utility closet in the hallway. Inside was the main electrical panel for the house. It was an old system, likely original to the building, which made it vulnerable. I opened the panel. The breakers were labeled neatly: kitchen, living room, basement, security system. I pulled a small Swiss Army knife from my pocket. I did not just want to turn the lights off. I wanted to make sure they stayed off. I began to loosen the wires on the main breaker, stripping the insulation just enough so that when the load peaked, like when the oven was turned on for the late-night snacks or the bass on the stereo was cranked up, the system would short. It would blow the main fuse and plunge the entire estate into darkness. "Enjoy the party, Vivian," I whispered. I closed the panel and turned to leave. But I froze. I heard a soft footstep behind me. It was not the heavy tread of a security guard or the click of Vivian's heels. It was light, hesitant. I pressed myself into the shadows of the closet, peering through the cracked door. A figure walked past. It was Amanda, Liam's wife. She looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, and she was holding a phone, her thumb hovering over the screen as if she were debating making a call. She looked terrified. She paused right in front of the closet, and for a second, I thought she saw me. She took a shaky breath and whispered to herself, I can't do this anymore. I have to tell him. She hurried down the hall toward the kitchen. I frowned. Was she talking about Liam? Was she going to confess to him? Or was she going to warn her mother I could not trust her? She'd been silent for months while they tortured my son. But her hesitation gave me pause. I checked my watch. The banks would be locking the Scott accounts in less than 10 minutes. The police would be dispatching units shortly after reading my email. I had to get back to the basement. When the lights went out, I would have exactly 60 seconds to cut Liam loose and drag him out the back door before the panic set in. I moved silently back toward the cellar door. The countdown had begun. The atmosphere in the house shifted violently. It started with a ripple of confusion near the bar. I watched from the darkened service hallway as the man in the navy suit, the one who had laughed about Liam's isolation, frowned at his phone. Then, a waiter stepped back from Vivian, looking embarrassed. I am sorry, Mrs. Scott, the waiter stammered, his voice carrying in the sudden lull. The card was declined. The terminal says, refer to issuer. Don't be ridiculous. Vivian snapped, snatching the card back. Run it again. It is a Platinum Unlimited. I did. Ma'am. It is frozen. Before she could scream, a heavy pounding echoed from the front door. The music cut out completely. A uniform voice boomed from the foyer. Police. We have a warrant for a welfare check on a Liam Walsh. Panic erupted. The guests, sensing the stench of scandal, began to scramble for their coats. Vivian stood frozen in the center of the room, her face twisting from arrogance to pure, unadulterated fury. She whipped around, her eyes scanning the room like a cornered predator. Who did this? She shrieked. Someone is leaking, find them. This was my moment. I reached into the utility panel I had rigged earlier and yanked the final wire. Pop. A spark showered down, and the entire house plunged into absolute blackness. Screams of surprise rang out from the ballroom. I did not hesitate. I turned on my penlight, keeping the beam focused on the floor, and sprinted for the basement door. I flew down the stairs, the darkness my ally. When I reached Liam, he was slumped forward, barely conscious. I pulled the magnetic key fob I had stolen from Vivian's desk out of my pocket, the device that controlled his shackles. I pressed it against the lock mechanism. Beep. Click. The heavy chains fell away with a clang. Liam groaned, collapsing forward into my arms. He was dead weight, his body burning with fever. I have got you. I grunted, hoisting his arm over my shoulder. Stand up, Liam. We have to move. We made it to the bottom of the stairs when a beam of light cut through the darkness above us. A figure stood at the top of the landing, blocking our path. I froze, my hand diving into my coat pocket for the heavy wrench I had grabbed from the closet. Wait, a voice whispered. It was Amanda. She stumbled down the stairs, her face pale in the reflected light of my flashlight. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Take me with you, she pleaded, her hands gripping the banister. Please, if I stay, she will destroy me too. I can't be her accomplice anymore. Get out of my way, I hissed, stepping in front of Liam. I am not trusting a Scott. Mom. No, Liam rasped, his head lolling against my shoulder. Let her come. She tried to sneak me food. She is terrified of them. I looked at Amanda's eyes. They held the same fear I saw in Liam's. I did not have time to argue. If you slow us down, I leave you behind. I warned, Above us! Vivian's voice roared from the kitchen. Closer now. They are in the basement. Block the back exits. Do not let them leave the property. Heavy footsteps thundered on the floorboards overhead. They were sealing the doors. We can't go out the back, Amanda whispered, panic rising in her voice. They have security on the perimeter. We are not going out the back, I said. I dragged Liam toward the far corner of the laundry room, behind the ancient furnace. There, hidden behind a stack of rotting plywood, was a small, square iron hatch. It was an old coal chute from when the house was built in 1920, a detail my husband had pointed out on the blueprints decades ago. It led directly to the dense shrubbery on the side of the hill, bypassing the main yard entirely. I kicked the plywood aside and yanked the rusted lever. The hatch groaned, but popped open, revealing a rush of freezing night air. Go. I ordered Amanda. Pull him through after you. She scrambled into the narrow tunnel. I pushed Liam up, his groans muffled by the wind howling outside. As I squeezed into the chute behind them, the basement door burst open. Flashlights swept the room. They are gone, a guard shouted. Find them! Vivian screamed, her voice sounding like tearing metal. Burn the woods if you have to. I will destroy everything they own. I will bury them. I pulled the hatch shut behind me and crawled into the snow, the sound of her madness fading into the storm. We were out. But the hunt had just begun. We dragged Liam through the snowdrifts, the wind howling like a wounded animal around us. My lungs burned with every inhalation of the freezing air. When we finally reached the edge of the driveway where I had parked my sedan, my heart sank. The car was listing to the left. The tires had been slashed, ribbons of rubber hanging loose against the rims. They knew, I hissed, wiping the snow from my eyes. They knew I was coming before I even stepped inside. Suddenly, a shape detached itself from the shadows of the garage. It was one of the private security guards, a massive man in a tactical vest. He moved with terrifying speed, lunging not for Liam, but for me. He slammed me against the side of the car, his hand closing around my throat. You made a big mistake, lady. He growled. I clawed at his gloves, my vision spotting. But then a blur of motion struck him from behind. Amanda. She had picked up a heavy rusted tire iron lying near the garage door and swung it with a guttural scream. It connected with the side of the guard's helmet with a sickening crack. He crumpled into the snow, unconscious. I stared at her. She was panting, her hands shaking violently, but her eyes were ferocious. Run, she gasped. There are more of them coming. We grabbed Liam again, his feet dragging through the powder, and scrambled toward the old abandoned barn that sat on the property line, about 200 yards away. It was a rotting wooden structure, barely standing, but it was the only cover we had. We threw ourselves inside just as beams of flashlights swept across the driveway where we had been standing seconds ago. Inside, the barn smelled of dry rot and ancient hay. I eased Liam down onto a pile of old sacks. He was shivering uncontrollably, his skin burning to the touch. We are trapped, I whispered, peering through a crack in the wooden slats. I could see figures moving systematically through the yard. They were armed. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was a paramilitary operation. No. We just need to hold out, Amanda said, her voice trembling but determined. She reached into her coat and pulled out a thick envelope and a small digital recorder. I looked at her, my suspicion flaring again. What is that leverage? Amanda said, her voice hardening. You think I stood by and did nothing. I signed those papers because Vivian held a knife to my throat, metaphorically and literally. She threatened to frame Liam for embezzlement if I didn't cooperate. But I knew she would cross the line. She pressed the play button on the recorder. Vivian's voice, clear and arrogant, filled the small space between us. Once the boy is committed, we liquidate the trust. If he dies in the facility, it is a tragedy, but a profitable one. Make sure the doctor knows to increase the dosage until his heart gives out. I want the Walsh name erased. I stared at the device, a cold chill running through me that had nothing to do with the snow. You were recording her, I said. Every day for 3 months. Amanda replied, tears finally spilling over. I was waiting for the right moment to go to the FBI. I didn't know you were coming tonight, but I couldn't let them take him away tomorrow. I had underestimated her. I thought she was a pawn, but she was a queen waiting to strike. Before I could answer, a blinding spotlight hit the barn, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Vivian's voice boomed from a megaphone outside, distorted and manic. Eleanor, I know you are in there. Send out my daughter and the invalid, and I might let you walk away with your life. Liam groaned, trying to sit up. Mum, don't let her in. I grabbed Amanda's shoulder. Give me the recorder. Hide the papers on Liam. What are you doing? She asked. Using a strategy from my merger days, I said grimly. When you are cornered, you create a diversion that forces the opponent to look the wrong way. I grabbed an old rusted shovel from the wall and smashed the glass of a small window on the far side of the barn, opposite to where the police would be coming from. I shouted as loud as I could, throwing a heavy loose plank out into the snow to create noise. Over there, flank left, I heard the head of security shout. The footsteps crunched heavily in the snow, moving away from the main road entrance. Now I whispered. But before we could move, the night exploded with blue and red lights. The wail of sirens cut through the wind, rising from the main road. My email had worked. The police were not just coming, they were swarming. Police, drop your weapons. A voice amplified by a squad car loudspeaker boomed over the wind. I looked through the slats. The Scott security team froze. Vivian lowered her megaphone, looking toward the driveway in disbelief as 3 cruisers smashed through the front gate, their lights painting the snow in chaotic flashes of color. It is over, I whispered to Liam, gripping his cold hand. The cavalry is here. The hunt had turned. The predators were now the prey. The interrogation room at the county precinct was stark and smelled of stale coffee, but to me, it felt like a boardroom. I sat across from the federal prosecutor and the lead detective, my hands folded on top of the heavy stack of evidence I had compiled. I was not there to plead. I was there to dictate terms. This is not a domestic dispute, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the overhead lights. This is a racketeering enterprise disguised as a family trust. If you look at page 4, you will see the wire transfer of $2 million from my son's estate to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. That company is registered to Vivian Scott. The prosecutor flipped through the pages, his eyes widening. I had done the work for them. I had connected the dots between the private care facility, the fraudulent power of attorney, and the sudden liquidation of Liam's assets. Mrs. Walsh. This is extensive, the prosecutor muttered. It is a roadmap, I corrected him, and I expect you to follow it. I did not wait for them to file charges before I made my next move. I walked out of the station and straight to the cluster of microphones waiting on the steps. I had called a press conference while Amanda was giving her statement. Control the narrative. Control the outcome. That was the first rule of corporate warfare. My son was chained in a basement on Christmas Eve, I told the reporters, looking directly into the lens of the lead camera. He was tortured not for ideology, but for profit. The Scott family has built an empire on the suffering of vulnerable people, and today, that empire falls. The story went viral before I even got back to the hospital where Liam was recovering. The public outrage was immediate and ferocious. But I knew shame alone would not stop a woman like Vivian. I needed to bankrupt her. I called Julian back. Execute the clause. I ordered. Because Julian had bought the debt on the Scott mansion and their business loans earlier that morning. We now held the mortgage. I had found a clause in their loan agreement regarding criminal conduct and moral turpitude that allowed the lender to call in the full loan immediately upon credible evidence of fraud. The default notice has been served. Julian confirmed. They have zero liquidity. We are seizing the house. Eleanor. We are taking the roof over their heads to pay for Liam's restitution. By the afternoon, the first domino fell from within the house itself. Vivian's brother, the man in the navy suit I had seen at the party, walked into the precinct with his lawyer. He saw the ship sinking and decided to save himself. He handed over a ledger, a physical black book, that detailed years of bribes paid to local judges and doctors to facilitate their involuntary commitment schemes. She made me do it. He reportedly told the police. Vivian ran everything. She called it the harvest. Then came the final nail in the coffin. Amanda walked out of the interview room, her face pale but her chin high. She stood next to me in the hallway. I told them everything, she whispered. I told them about the drugging. I told them how she practiced forging Liam's signature. I gave them the dates and the times. You did good, I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. By the time the sun set on December 26th, the Scott family name was toxic. The bank accounts were frozen. The house was under foreclosure proceedings initiated by my shell company. Vivian Scott was arraigned on charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I sat in the hospital waiting room, watching the news on the mounted television. They showed footage of Vivian being led out of her mansion in handcuffs, shielding her face from the flashbulbs. Her political allies had already issued statements distancing themselves. Her donors were demanding refunds. In 48 hours, I had taken a dynasty that had stood for 50 years and turned it into dust. I did not feel joy. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. They had tried to treat my son like a transaction, so I had closed the deal. It had been 3 weeks since the night the lights went out at the Scott estate. The silence in Liam's hospital room was not the terrifying silence of the basement. It was the quiet rhythm of healing. I sat in the hard plastic chair, watching the rise and fall of my son's chest. The bruises on his face were fading into a sickly yellow, and the IV lines had finally been removed. But the scars around his wrists, where the cuffs had bitten into his skin, were still angry and red. Amanda stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot. She had not left his side since the police took her statement, but she held herself with the posture of someone ready to run. Finally, she turned to me. I am sorry. Eleanor, she whispered, her voice cracking. I was so afraid of her. I let it go on for too long. I should have called you the first time she locked him in that room. I looked at her. A month ago, I would have destroyed her for her weakness. But I had seen her swing that tire iron. I had seen her testify against her own mother for 8 hours straight yesterday. You saved him when it mattered, I said, my voice low. Fear is a powerful cage, Amanda. I know that better than anyone. She wiped her eyes and nodded, then looked at Liam. I can't stay here. Eleanor, the marshals say I need to go into protective custody until the trial. My uncles they are vindictive. If I stay, I put Liam in danger again. Go, I said. Do what you need to do to testify. Put them away. Amanda, that is your penance. When she left, the room felt smaller, more intimate. Liam shifted in the bed, his eyes fluttering open. They were clearer now, the haze of trauma beginning to lift, though I knew the shadows would linger for years. She is gone, he asked, his voice raspy. She is going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. I replied. I reached out and took his hand. It felt frail in mine. Liam, I need to say something. He looked at me, bracing himself, as if he expected a lecture on his poor judgment. That reaction broke my heart more than the chains had. I failed you, I said, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. I was so cold to you after your father died. I buried myself in work, and I let you believe that love was something you had to earn with success. I made you vulnerable to them. You were starving for a family, and the Scots saw that hunger and used it as a leash. Liam squeezed my hand weakly. Tears pooled in his eyes. I tried to leave. Mum, he choked out. That night, on Christmas Eve, the reason they chained me up was because I packed a bag. I told Vivian I was done. I told her. I am going home to my mother. The air left my lungs. He had been punished because he wanted to come back to me. All those times I had ignored his calls because I was too busy or criticized his career choices. He still wanted to come home. I didn't know. I whispered. I called you. He said, a tear sliding down his cheek. 2 months ago, I called and left a voicemail. I said I was tired. I said I felt trapped. But you just texted back and told me to toughen up and handle my business. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I remembered that text. I had sent it during a board meeting, annoyed by what I thought was his lack of ambition. I had not heard the plea for help. I had only heard a complaint. I am so sorry, I said. And for the first time in 20 years, I let myself cry in front of him. I promise you, Liam, never again. I will spend the rest of my life making up for that text. He nodded, closing his eyes. I just want to go home. Mom, not to that house, just somewhere safe. I took care of that, I said, wiping my face and letting the steel return to my spine. But this time, it was a protective steel. I bought the house. Liam, the bank foreclosed on the Scott estate this morning, and I purchased it through the holding company. But we are not going to live there. I am selling it. I am going to burn that memory to the ground. I reached into my bag and pulled out a brochure. I am starting a foundation. I told him, the Walsh Initiative. We are going to use the profits from the sale of the Scott Empire to fund legal defense for victims of financial and domestic abuse. I spent a lifetime destroying people for money. Now, I am going to use my money to destroy the people who deserve it. Liam looked at me, and a faint, genuine smile touched his lips. That sounds like a good plan, he said. Rest now, I said, smoothing the blanket over his scarred wrists. I am not going anywhere. I am right here. And I meant it. The businesswoman was gone. The mother had finally returned to her post. Vivian did not go down quietly. Even from behind the glass of the visitors' room in the county jail, she managed to launch a counterattack. She had her lawyer release a statement to the press, claiming that I was a bitter, estranged mother, manipulating the narrative to seize control of the Scott family fortune. She called me a corporate vulture and claimed Liam was mentally unstable and needed her protection. For a moment, the tabloids hesitated, sensing a juicy, scandalous twist. But I had saved the kill shot for exactly this moment. I had not released the final audio file I found on the tablet in the study. I walked into the office of the United States Attorney and placed my phone on the mahogany desk. "Play track 4, I said calmly. The prosecutor pressed play. The room went dead silent as Vivian's voice, clear and undeniably malicious, filled the air. If he refuses to sign the transfer by morning, break his fingers. We can say it was self-inflicted during a manic episode. I don't care if he is a cripple for the rest of his life. As long as the ink is on the paper, I will destroy him before I let him leave this house." That recording ended the media war instantly. It was no longer a case of fraud. It was a conspiracy to commit torture and kidnapping. The federal investigation expanded overnight, dragging in the corrupt doctor who had signed the commitment papers and the notary who had witnessed the forged documents. 6 months later, I stood in the hallway of the federal courthouse. It was the final day of the trial. Vivian was being led in by 2 marshals. She looked smaller without her designer suits, wearing a drab orange jumpsuit, but her eyes still held that venomous shine. She stopped when she saw me, pulling against her restraints. "You think you won," she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "You ruined a legacy. For what, a weakling son who couldn't even handle his own wife?" I stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her flinch. "I didn't ruin a legacy. Vivian, I liquidated a failing asset," I said, my voice cold and steady. "And unlike you, I know when to close a deal." Inside the courtroom, her defense evaporated. The ledger her brother had turned over, combined with Amanda's tearful testimony and the damning audio recordings, buried her. When the judge read the verdict, the sound of the gavel felt like a thunderclap clearing the air. On the counts of kidnapping, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and aggravated assault, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You are also issued a permanent restraining order against Liam Walsh and his family. Vivian did not scream. She just slumped forward against the defense table, finally crushed by the weight of her own greed. I felt a hand tighten around mine. I looked down to see Liam sitting beside me. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders dropping as if he had been carrying a stone mountain for years. "It is over," he whispered. "It is over." I confirmed. Fast forward to exactly 1 year later. It was Christmas Eve again. The snow was falling just as hard as it had that night in Minnesota, but this time we were safe in a small, warm cabin in Vermont. The fire was roaring in the hearth. Liam walked over to the fireplace. In his hand, he held a single link of the rusted industrial chain I had kept as evidence. He had asked me for it that morning. He stood there for a long moment, watching the flames dance. He did not look like the broken man I had found in the cellar. He looked like my son again. He tossed the iron link into the fire. We watched as the heat licked around it, turning the metal black. Merry Christmas. Mom, he said, turning to me with a smile that finally reached his eyes. I walked to the window, looking out at the pristine white landscape burying the world in silence. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. No one chains my family again, I whispered to the winter night. No one. Not ever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of a ride. Drop a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. Right now, I love reading about all the different places our community calls home. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next one.